All right, it is noon sharp, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, and welcome to today's webinar, Unpacking the latest Social Security Trustees Report. My name is Lauren LaFerla, and I'm the Director of Communications here at Covism. I'm joined today by our speaker, Joe Alsasser. Joe is a certified financial planner and the founder and president of Covism. Under his leadership, Covism has developed a variety of groundbreaking financial planning tools, including Social Security Timing, which was the first patented Social Security optimizer, Tax Clarity, Smart Risk, and Income Insight. Joe co-authored Social Security Essentials, Smart Ways to Boost Your Retirement Income, and is a regular contributor for USA Today, Investment News, Retirement Daily, CNBC, and Think Advisor. Joe also maintains a financial planning practice in Omaha, Nebraska, doing the very things he'll talk about today. As I mentioned earlier, our topic today is unpacking the latest Social Security Trustees Report. You should see a button labeled Q&A at the bottom of your screen. If you have a question, please type it in the box and we'll address your questions at the end of the presentation. Just a reminder, we will be recording today's presentation and you'll receive a link to the recording in your inbox later today. Thanks for attending, and I'll turn it over to Joe.
Thanks everyone for taking the time out today, and we're going to try to cram a good bit of content here in the next half hour. So please do ask questions as you go. We'll address as many of them as we can. At the end of the presentation, we'll follow up with you otherwise. But please do put those questions in. Just adds a little bit of value, a little bit of interactivity. So that said, here's the agenda for today. We're going to go through some of the key findings from the most recent trustees report. We'll talk a little bit about what's next. There's kind of a cadence for Social Security announcements. It was off this time, but there's more coming here in the near future, and then again, more next spring. So paying attention to what's next, what do we expect, is going to be important. We'll talk about potential impacts on claiming strategies, and we'll talk about communicating with clients. So let's dig right in. You've probably seen a variety of headlines through the pandemic. The earliest one was the Bipartisan Policy Center that came out early in the pandemic and said, gosh, we could be looking at a trust fund exhaustion date of 2029. Rather than what Social Security had predicted in the prior trustees report. And even in the 2020 trustees report, they said, hey, we can't predict this yet. And so they left it at 2035 with 79% of benefits payable. Well, when the Bipartisan Policy Center came out, this was a pretty alarmist, a pretty scary sort of report, saying that 2029 is the likely exhaustion date and 69% of benefits would be payable at that point. After that, there were several additional studies that suggested less dire predictions. So we're going to dig into what the trustees said most recently. Here are the key statistics. And if there are a few things you want to write down to be part of your conversations with your clients, these are probably the headline numbers. We'll dig into them a little bit, but the headline numbers are that the most recent trustees report suggests that OASDI, that's the Old Age Survivors and Disability Insurance Trust Fund, will be depleted in 2034. The prior prediction was 2035, and now 78% rather than 79% of benefits would still be payable. So why is that important? There is a lot of research out there that suggests that people dramatically underestimate the amount of benefits they would still receive, even if we end up, fast forward 10 years, even if we end up in a situation where we've got a government that just can't agree, just can't get anything done. It's shocking what percentage of people, it's roughly over half, who believe that more than half of benefits would not be available at that point in time. So 78% of benefits being payable is the current prediction for what would be payable under the combined OASDI trust funds. Now, in theory, the OASI and OAS and DI trust funds are separate funds. The reason Social Security reports them together is historically, we've seen greater shortfalls in the disability insurance trust fund than we have in the old age and survivor insurance trust fund. And so what has happened is Congress has allocated money from the trust funds, effectively blending them together. And that's why you see them reported together. If we were to focus just on the old age and survivor insurance depletion date, that one went down to 2033 from 2034, and only 76% of benefits are payable. Now, in order to make an allocation from one trust fund to the other, it does require congressional action. That's an important thing to know. So if we were really thinking about a situation where benefit cuts were actually allowed to happen, I don't think there's any expert around Social Security that believes that benefit cuts, that the full-scale benefit cut would happen. And yet, if we were to think about that kind of a scenario, we'd really be looking more at this date and this kind of percentage. And the reason we'd be looking so is because in the absence of congressional action, they are separate trust funds. So the next key things are, what kind of tax increases would it take in order to prevent this kind of a situation? So if we were to get a tax increase right now, and keep all benefit levels the same, it would require a 3.36% increase in FICA tax. And so, of course, it would likely be split half between the employee and half between the employer, or for those lucky self-employed folks, you get to pay the whole thing. And if FICA taxes were increased at the depletion date, it would require a 4.2% increase in order to completely meet the need for promised benefits. Now, it's really interesting, that number. It's gone up substantially over the years, and effectively each year that elapses, that number goes up because there is a bigger, it becomes a bigger problem. So that's something to look at from historical trustees reports, is to watch how much that number grows over time. So this was a quote from the trustees report, and it basically is the disclaimer that says we still don't know exactly what the impacts are going to be. And diving into this trustees report, you noticed quite a few assumptions that were a little different than maybe expected. So let's pause there before we dive into those assumptions with a little poll question. Lauren? All right, so we've got that poll popped up now. What percentage of OASI benefits are expected to be payable after the trust fund's exhaustion? If you could, pop in your answer there. We'll wait just a second to get everybody's responses in. Outstanding. Thanks everyone for doing that. If you want to pull that down. So 76% was everybody was listening. That's fantastic. That was by far the most popular answer among you. So congratulations. Right now, a good percentage of you have 100% on the test so far. All right. There were a few interesting happenings. Now, this was the latest trustees report issued in history. Literally in the history of the Social Security system, this was the latest trustees report issued. The latest prior to this was during the Great Recession. And insiders tell me that at the time it was because they didn't know the impact of national health care, of the Affordable Care Act, of the implementation there. And so that, in theory, was the behind the scenes explanation of that one. This one has an explanation, but what I understand is that they could have gone the route that they went last year and said, okay, we don't have full projections around the pandemic, but here's our best guess, and still released it on time. Instead, we had a lot of internal turmoil surrounding Social Security. On July 9th, the Commissioner of Social Security, now this in theory is a presidential appointment that requires Senate, well, that part isn't in theory. It is a presidential appointment that requires Senate confirmation. But in theory, it's one of those positions that is supposed to be independent, isn't supposed to be influenced by whatever political party is in house at the time. And yet this was a situation where the commissioner was actually asked to resign, and then when he refused to resign, he was fired. And then the deputy commissioner resigned under the same pressure. And that happened in early July, and the trustees report was delayed until August 31st. So you have to imagine at minimum that there were some internal things happening that might have caused that delay. So there's a few things we're really watching, because the next major sets of releases come out in October and November. So those are some things that we're watching. But I guess before we get to that slide, we'll talk a little bit about costs. This is, and these charts are available. This is from the trustees report. These charts are available for download as a separate package. So if you're doing Social Security seminars and you'd like to use some of the charts that are in the trustees report, you can actually download that entire chart package and use those for your presentations. So this is a nice visual explanation of what happens with the trust fund. So this is the combined OASDI trust fund. And you notice it's here in positive territory after 2010, but the costs were not capable of paying full benefits after 2035 is the first year of the cut. So after 2034 for the combined fund. And then you see that's the expected payable benefits after that depletion. So this is from the actual chart package that accompanies the trustees report. Now, the couple of big things that we're really watching for in the program updates that come out in October, November, this is typically when cost of living adjustments, bend points, things of that nature are announced. The first really big one is the average wage index. So some of you may have heard of the Social Security notch, or this idea that because the average wage declined in 2020 or was expected to decline, people who reach initial eligibility would see a reduced benefit amount, substantially reduced, and that's why they call it a notch. Now, in November, there was an update, and that was projected, the average wage index was projected as negative 4.01%. And the reason that's significant is in the near term, one of the reasons why Social Security estimated that the cost of the program would actually not be as high as projected is because of this notch, because of these newly eligible individuals that would be paid considerably less as a benefit amount. Now, the trustees report just projected that average wage index coming out at a positive 2.73%. So that's a really significant gap between what was projected just as recently as November and what was projected in the actual trustees report. We're going to be watching those bend points really closely when they're announced. Now, the next one is the cost of living adjustment. The cost of living adjustment, you might have seen articles out there projecting the cost of living adjustment with June and July inflation, some of the highest on record in recent history, was recently projected as high as 6%. And the trustees report projected it at only 3.06%. So it'll be really interesting to see if September, October inflation is low enough to bring it back down to somewhere near Social Security's projection. Now, in the absence of seeing kind of significant changes here, what we might expect, keep in mind, we're really looking at early next year. Most years, it's not the end of August when we get a trustees report. Most years, it's March, April, May. In fact, the responsibility for the Social Security Administration, they are supposed to release that report by April 1st. Its due date is April 1st. They're regularly late on it, but August is really late. So we'll be looking again for these updates in October and November, and then we'll be looking again literally 6 months from now for the next Social Security Trustees report to be projected or to be released. Now, I would not be at all surprised if we saw that 2034 and 2033 date move back a year to 2033, 2032. That's a real possibility. So we want to be paying attention to that. Now, that said, the point of the webinars that we do around benefit cuts and around the state of the Social Security system is not to say everyone should go out and claim as soon as possible because the system's going broke, there's no money there. That's an alarmist view. It's not a good view. It's not a realistic view. Even in the absence of action, it's important to remember that somewhere in the neighborhood of 76% of benefits are going to continue to be payable just by then current tax revenues. And that's a message that our clients really need to hear. Now, the next real key question is, so what? What does that mean? We're going to address that next. But this is the software update that we made. So in Social Security timing, you've got a benefit cut scenario that allows you to say, okay, what happens to these claiming strategies that we're evaluating What happens if Congress just can't agree? Are you still okay? That's the real point of the conversation. And so we've changed the benefit cut year default to 2033. Remember, if there's no action, if Congress just can't agree, then these are two separate trust funds. So 2033 is the OASI date. And we changed the benefit cut percentage default to 24%, meaning 76% of benefits would continue to be payable under the stress test. So those are the changes that we've made to the software. They were available, I think, within 2 days after the announcement of the trustees report. So we've got another quick poll. In the absence of reform, so nothing happens, no one can agree, what tax hike would be necessary to pay full promised benefits? That means it's delayed all the way out until whatever the exhaustion date is, 2033 or 2034. I'll give you a couple of seconds to get an answer in there. All right, thanks everybody for putting your answers in. And I see we've got some questions coming in, so that's fantastic. We've got about half and half between 3.6 and 4.2. So remember, if this problem is not solved until the depletion date, the tax hike that would be necessary to pay full promised benefits is 4.2%. So 4.2% was the correct answer there. So now we've got a good portion with 100% on the test so far, and we've got a good portion with 75%. Hopefully you'll get that last question right. So I want to dig a little bit into the Social Security decision, because this is the decision where advisors still have the ability to add significant value, particularly by virtue of helping consumers, helping clients understand and not make a decision based on fear. So this is the probability of survival for a 62-year-old male, as accessed in middle of last year, in a non-smoker in average health. So this is not exceptionally good or exceptionally poor health. What you'll notice for a male at 62 is they've got a 52% probability of living at least 25 years in retirement and a 30+% probability of living at least 30 years. And those numbers are higher for a female. So a female has a 63% chance of living at least 25 years and a 43% chance of living at least 30 years in retirement. Now, why is that important? If we just look at a 62-year-old female, right? Over 43% chance of living to age 90, actually to age 92, with a $2,500 primary insurance amount or benefit at full retirement age. Filing right away at 62 is worth $615,000 to her, or following a strategy is worth about $759,000. In this case, it's just delay all the way till 70. That $144,000 difference to her, that's the present value. So that's in today's dollars. That's like putting an extra 145 grand in her pocket today. Now, what's important about this is starting with the baseline, starting with, okay, we fully do expect some version of a compromise to materialize. So starting with the system as it exists today is what we would suggest you do in your planning. And yet planning for that contingency, what happens if it doesn't work out? So you've probably all seen a break-even chart. And for a single person, this kind of break-even chart makes all the sense in the world. She's going to be better off having delayed benefits, but if she makes it to about age 82, she's got a very high probability of making it to about age 82. If we drop into a married couple, he's a higher wage earner, she's an upper wage earner, and we're planning for 87 and 91 years old. We've got a 3-year age gap between the two. Typical Social Security planning would have them following a strategy that would be worth about $234,000. That's the present value of the difference between those two strategies. He would delay till 70, she would delay till 69. And when we're looking at a married couple, we really want to look at a break even that looks more like this, because obviously the paths of those lines change based on when somebody dies. So if he dies early, she needs to make it to about 86. But if he lives out to 80, she only needs to make it to about 80. The place where those lines, where the color changes is effectively the break-even age. Now, this is going to be an exceedingly common strategy going forward. It's been an exceedingly common strategy in our practice for quite some time, and that's this idea of a split strategy, where our recommended strategy was both delay. She only delays till 69, not quite to 70, just because of the life expectancies, rather than claiming early. Huge difference there. The split strategy has him delay as long as possible, and she claims as soon as possible. So she claims at 62 and he claims at 70. And you notice that you capture the majority of that difference by virtue of following the split strategy at the life expectancies that we had entered. So this is what that alternate strategy would look like. He claims at 70, she at 62. And here's the break-even chart. The base idea here is that either one of them dies early, they're going to be better off with the split strategy, as long as one of them lives even a reasonably long life, past about 80. Now, if both live a long time, they're going to be better off in that both delay strategy. So what we've just seen is that planning for survivor benefits is probably the most critical piece of the puzzle. Survivor is going to receive the higher of his or her own benefit or the benefit of the deceased. Some of those folks are going to be survivors receiving widow benefits for a very long time. And the vast majority of those widow benefit recipients are women. Oftentimes, you've got a younger female who has a longer life expectancy just by virtue of being female, just by virtue of being built better than males. And so ultimately, that is a huge consideration, is that survivor benefit. Now, of course, we're going to hear more and more cries for people saying, take it now because Social Security is going broke. Invest it individually, you can do better than you would do with Social Security. And I don't even know who to attribute that quote for, because lots of people say it. Now, we put an article out about a year ago, and this is out there on the street, it's still out there, where we compared a couple of different scenarios. We did a benefit cut of 24% occurring in 2035. It just so happens that even though we published this article last year, this is actually Social Security's projection. So 24% happening in 2035 or 24 in 2029. And what we see for a 62-year-old female with a $2,000 monthly benefit, she's going to be better off by age 85 by following the delay strategy, regardless of which scenario benefits were cut under. And so for an awful lot of people, and you look even at age 85 with a 24% cut happening in 2035, there's still a pretty significant value difference to be delivered to her. So lots of value, particularly for single females, for divorced females. That's a really high value decision. For married couples, you're going to see the same thing. So here's a case study and where you see a break-even comparison. This is our same case study as earlier. If we did not have any benefit cut, the break-even would occur in 2037. Now, under that benefit cut scenario, the break-even is in 2041. So the cumulative difference at age 90, she still has a 44% chance of making it past age 90, $71,000 value difference. We do the same thing for a married couple. We do a benefit cut of 25% in 2029. So this is a really bad case benefit cut. What's that look like? Very similar situation. Break even occurring in 2039 for them between both claiming early and the recommended strategy versus 2042. So it pushes it out about 3 years. Now, the cumulative difference under the cut scenario is still $115,000. This is what you're going to see for all of you who are Social Security timing subscribers. You're going to see this in the portal version, not the legacy version of Social Security timing. So if you haven't seen the benefit cut scenario, you want to make sure you're accessing the new version of Social Security timing. That's the one you, by default, the one you log into. So you'll see the no cut strategy comparison, 967 versus 842. Or if you just check the button, you'll see the cut difference, which in this case is 733 versus 693. So still a significant value. You'll also see the break-even chart repopulated. You run it first without a cut, and then you run it again with the cut. In this particular case, we do see the break-even moving considerably further, right? This is going to be different case by case, and that's why it's important to really evaluate each of those situations on a case-by-case basis. you've got a break even that moves from about 89 to about 97. So interesting to note, doesn't move as much in the middle, but it is worth paying attention to. Now, the big thing that you are going to notice is the value of a split strategy, even with benefit cuts, is still exceedingly strong. So when you have at least one member of a couple who lives past average life expectancy, the value of that split strategy really ends up being highly valuable. Now, if both make it a long time, of course, the both delay strategy continues to be most valuable. So hopefully that gives you some idea that this idea that if benefit cuts do materialize, it sinks everything, just isn't true. If benefit cuts materialize, yeah, break-even points move a little, and the value that you will have achieved by virtue of following a delay strategy is not as great, but it is still significant, is important to understand. It's important to be able to visualize with your clients, be able to address those fears before they make a decision that really just doesn't align with reality. So consumers ultimately really do need your help, both with that initial Social Security analysis. And like I said, the way we think about this is you plan under current rules. You expect some version of compromise, but you plan around what happens to my overall retirement income if Congress can't reach a compromise. Is the client okay? Can they still meet their retirement goals? Each year that approaches, we're going to want to reevaluate that. So fitting that into the context of the overall retirement income plan and stress testing to make sure they're okay. And then ultimately, as advisors, this is our job anyway, filling the gap appropriately with investment management and insurance consideration. So there's probably been no time greater than right now where people do need advisors' help, because the more of these headlines that we see, and particularly if next year we see a date that moves up yet another year, we're going to see confidence that is just not there in the system. And if people are acting on the thought that benefits might just disappear, that's definitely not the right thought to be acting on. So how do we fit in for Social Security timing? Most of you are probably already Social Security timing subscribers. Allows you to do all the things we just did. Income Insight allows you to put that in the context of their overall retirement income plan. Do all the things you probably do in your retirement income practice, including Roth conversions. Tax Clarity and Smart Risk are parts of that process as well. So I know we've got quite a few questions that came in the meantime. Lauren, do you have some of those?
Absolutely. So I know a few folks sent over questions ahead of time prior to the webinar, and we appreciate that. So I'm going to do a few of those, and then we'll launch into the questions in the Q&A box. So the first one here is, we hear about a Social Security trust. Is there a place where the trust is actually being monitored? Is there a report that shows how much and who owes money to the trust?
It's a great question, because that is what the trustees report is designed to do. So the trust is managed by the Social Security trustees, and the trustees every year are required to publish these projections that say, okay, who does own the trust fund money, if you will. And the way that happens behind the scenes is the trust fund actually holds senior government bonds. They, in theory, are senior to all the other government obligations. So effectively, Social Security holds IOUs from the federal government in the trust fund. And those projections are based on combination of the trust fund assets along with current tax revenue. How long does the money last, number one, and what percentage of benefits are payable? So that trustees report really is the report that says who owes what and how long will it last.
Lots of talk on Social Security. Any correlations to the other big entitlement program, Medicare? The future of Medicare, is it as dire?
Sure. Medicare also has challenges, and the Social Security Trustees Report also covers, to some extent, the Medicare situation. So it's the HI trust fund that's outlined in the Social Security report. At the same time, there are a lot more financing options for Medicare. We've seen premium changes over time. Those change each year. You've got surcharges that are applied to higher income earners that aren't technically taxes, though really they're taxes. They just don't follow the same process as Social Security change needs to follow. And so you've got some mechanisms in the health insurance trust fund or in the Medicare trust fund that are different than the mechanics of Social Security. And so we've really tried to focus on the Social Security side today.
This is a summary of an advisor question, a variation of a question we get kind of all the time. What about taking Social Security benefits early while available, even if reduced, in favor of permitting personal retirement assets to grow unimpeded for a greater length of time to perhaps create their own replacement pension by using variable lifetime income annuities?
Sure. And it is a question we get all the time. And the answer is really this: Social Security is the least expensive annuity that we can buy. And really, even if we did experience some form of benefit cuts, it's likely that spending $1 of our own money in order to delay a Social Security benefit still works out better than buying an annuity from a private insurance company. Now, if we were comparing to investing, we would really want to be making the comparison against other assets of similar quality. And the closest asset is the TIPS, the Treasury Inflation Protected Securities. So the default in Social Security timing is actually to discount all future benefits by the real rate of return, which is the average of all outstanding maturities over, I believe, 10 years for TIPS. And that puts it on a level footing. So the simple answer is it makes sense to compare to an asset of similar quality. Social Security timing already does that in those projections that I gave you, the present value difference between claiming early and delay.
Great. This question came in early on in the presentation. Where are those increased percentages coming from?
The tax increase percentages, they come from Social Security Trustees model. So both Congressional Budget Office and Social Security trustees have functional mathematical models of what happens to trust funds over time. And that projected tax increase is based on that modeling.
When was the last SSI contribution raise?
SSI contribution? Frankly, SSI is out of my area of expertise. SSI is the entitlement program for lower wage and handicapped individuals, and it's really out of my area of expertise there.
When will the AWI for 2020 be announced? Why did that change?
We expect it in that October-November release. That's typically where we get the new bend points.
Is the Social Security Administration taking into account the expected drop in benefits in the current benefits paid?
The expected drop in benefits. So that was the point on the average wage index issue. So Social Security Administration projected an average wage increase of negative 4.06, meaning wages fell off due to all the unemployment. That was their projection back in November. Then this trustees report projected actual wage increases. Average wages increased through last year by 2.73%. So that's a really disjointed thing. Social Security's trustees report did not project that decline in benefits because it assumes that there would have been wage growth during 2020. So it'll be really interesting to see which one actually happened, their November prediction or their August prediction.
Right. How much does the full retirement age need to increase to keep benefits whole?
So every year there is, and not every year actually, there is a page on Social Security's website. It's ssa.gov/solvency, and a variety of different mechanisms for bringing the system into balance are presented and how much of an impact they would have on the trust fund. That has not been revised yet to incorporate the new numbers from this trust fund report. So I don't believe there is an estimate given the new state of the Social Security system for how much full retirement age would need to move. If full retirement age did move, it would not be likely that that would be the only solve. That would be a solve that meets part of the need, and then there would be some other combination. I was talking with Jason Fichtner. He is a former deputy commissioner of Social Security and chief economist for Bipartisan Policy Center a couple of weeks ago. And he said it used to be that we believed it would be a third, right? 1/3 benefit cuts of some sort, either increase full retirement age, et cetera. 1/3 taxes, 50-50 between those two. Now he believes it'll be a third, a third from those two sources, and a third potentially just coming from general revenues from the federal government. That's a real departure if that sort of solution ends up materializing.
Is that a 4.2% increase in the current rate or an additional 4.2% for the tax rate?
An additional 4.2% on top of the current 12.4%. And I'm excluding the Medicare portion there.
When you were doing a break-even analysis, you point out the loss in present value terms, but what about the present value dollars if you need to spend to offset the lack of Social Security income in all those years you were deferring?
Well, present value accounts for that. That's why you do it in present value. It accounts for the loss of earnings on what you could have had you invested the money. It's just that it's not fair. A lot of people are tempted to use, let's just say that I might use a 8% projected return, but that 8% projected return on an investment portfolio is not nearly as safe as a Social Security benefit, even if I account for cuts. And so that's why we say you generally want to peg that to something like TIPS, Treasury Inflation Protected Securities.
This is kind of an interesting question. It is a pretty unusual expectation for any real retirees to wait until 70 to claim. They are tired and they need the money. Isn't our better strategy as an industry to get that more aggressive on getting people to get to full retirement age? That's the ideal amount and way better than claiming at 62. Aren't we misaligned with real retirees?
Well, I would say no. My practice focuses really highly on that middle and upper middle income retiree. I don't know if we have any high wage earners in a couple. I don't know that we have anyone that didn't delay till 70. And as they reach 70, and they then see the impact on their tax bill. No, I don't think that's a realistic expectation. I think we're selling ourselves short if we do that. Sorry.
A few people have asked about the recording. And like I said at the beginning, yes, we're recording this presentation. I will make sure I send it out to everyone. And you should get a copy into your inbox later today. Can a citizen access the trust fund report?
Absolutely. SSA.gov. Actually, if you just type into Google Social Security Trustees Report, if you get really nerdy, you can access all of the historical reports, and it gets kind of interesting comparing the projections over time. I mean, 1983 was a big crisis. So, trust funds were literally just a few months from running out before the 1983 Social Security amendments. It is interesting to see some of that historical context, and anyone can access them.
I'll actually make it easy for you, and I'll include a link in the email I send when I send the recording. I will go ahead and send a link to the trustees report as well, so you can send that on if you are interested. We are running out of time, so I want to do one last quick poll question. We always try to ask this just in case, and that is, would you like to talk one-on-one? Yes, I'm a CoVism software prospect and I would like a demo. Yes, I'm a customer and I want to see what's new. I'd like to talk to you personally, either Joe or myself. And thanks, I'm good for now, and we will leave you alone. So if you want to just go ahead and plug your answer in there. I know we didn't quite get to everyone's questions. If we didn't get to your question today, I will make sure we send you a follow-up email with the answer to your question later on in the week. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And I want to thank Joe for taking the time as well. So we'll go ahead and end the webinar, and we'll see you next time.